Good morning, everyone. My name is MightyStream, and I'm going to do your May the 24th just for today in a meditation. If you need to reach me, feel free to do so at recoveryofhope21@gmail.com. The title of the meditation for today is Risking Vulnerability. As we grow, we learn to overcome the tendency to run and hide from ourselves and our feelings. That comes from the basic text, page 85. It says, rather than risking vulnerability, many of us have developed habits that keep others at a safe distance. These patterns of emotional isolation can give us the feeling we are hopelessly locked behind our mask. We used to take risks with our lives. Now we take risks with our feelings. Through sharing with other addicts, we learn that we are not unique. We do not make ourselves unduly vulnerable simply by letting others know who we are, for we are in good company. And by working the 12 steps of the NA program, we grow and change. We no longer want or need to hide our emerging selves. We are offered the opportunity to shed the emotional camouflage we developed to survive our active addiction. By opening ourselves to others, we risk becoming vulnerable, but that risk is well worth the rewards. With the help of our sponsor and other recovering addicts, we learn how to express our feelings honestly and openly. In turn, we become nourished and encouraged by the unconditional love of our companions. As we practice spiritual principles, we find strength and freedom, both in ourselves and in those around us. We are set free to be ourselves and to enjoy the company of our fellow addicts. Just for today, I will openly and honestly share with another recovering addict. I will risk becoming vulnerable and celebrate myself and my friendship with other NA members. I will grow. Let's take a moment of silence, followed by the we version of the Serenity Prayer. A moment of silence now, please. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things that we cannot change, the courage to change the things that we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Just for today, please and thank you. This is a process. To become vulnerable for many of us is a risk. It goes against everything that we did in the streets while using. Now, we were vulnerable, but we probably had our antennas up in such a way that everything was considered a threat. Every action, every word, every perceived thought was considered a threat and detrimental to our using. So there was a tendency to have our feelings on our sleeves and check everything and everybody. Like, I don't know what you think you're doing. What are you doing? Right? There was a tendency to be argumentative, ready to go at the drop of a hat, at the least violation of what we perceived as our boundaries, because there was something that we were trying to protect. Now, it may not have been obvious to everyone, but it should have been. Because a person that is using drugs, right? When we're in that mode of using, we are trying to protect our true selves, our true feelings, our true experiences from becoming exposed. using the drug to change our perception about what was going on and hopefully convince others that something else was going on and not really exposing our true self, our true nature, our true issues to them. However, just by using alone, that in itself is a statement that something else is going on, because using the drug is just a symptom of our disease of addiction. Therefore, when we get clean, we come into the program, and now we're talking about sharing in meetings, getting a sponsor, coming early and staying late, 90 and 90. All of this goes against the way that we operated while we were in active addiction. But the truth of the matter is, even if we didn't intentionally plan to be vulnerable, we were, because we were risking our lives every time we took one more. Every time we put ourselves in the cut, we were risking our lives. We were vulnerable, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. We were taking risk, whether or not we want to acknowledge it. You can call it any other word you want, but at the end of the day, that's a fact. So when we come into the program, now we're taking risk with our feelings. Now we're risking taking our feelings off of our sleeves and explaining them. Now we're risking exposing our two faces in one heart, right? Now we're risking letting people know exactly what's going on with us. And it is a process. You can find, I've done it and I continue to do it. I just shared in a meeting and I just said, I don't have a lot of clean time coming up on 30 years in August. I don't have a lot of clean time compared to some of my, predecessors. And they got me, every time I talk to them and start mentioning all this extra literature that we've gotten lately, the Living Clean book, the guiding principles, the spiritual principle a day. Every time I talk about all this other stuff that I've collected, talking to some of my predecessors, they'll tell you about the days, which I do remember as well. But for me, I've always had access to a basic text, but they'll talk about the days where it was just a white little book, right? Explaining, some very basic things about the program. And pamphlets were adored because they were pieces of the literature that you could keep with you, right? So their ideal of having all this extra stuff to, even for some of them, even having the flat book, right? The working guide for the steps is too much. They don't have a level of openness when it comes to that. So I have to be careful sometimes, even when I'm dealing with old timers, because I know the mentality is that I've gotten this far. I don't need that literature. I'm gonna keep the basic text and maybe the just for the day, and it works, and keep it moving. Right? They're not interested in all this extra literature. So I have to be careful, even in my conversations about the literature, because I don't want to fall into the trap that there's not something more for me to learn. And even though this has worked thus far, I'm still very much open to new information and understanding this disease of addiction. And now people are calling it a disorder. There's so many terms that are being applied to it. And some of it truly, I believe, has always been the case. But I just think that as a society, we're more ready to have the discussions that need to be had. So being vulnerable will look like different things for different people. For the addict that is new coming into recovery, that process of becoming vulnerable is going to be life-saving in and of itself, because you'll be exposing yourself to new experiences, new feelings, new expressions, people expressing their disease of addiction and their recovery in different ways that won't always match with what you're comfortable with. And every time you embrace something different that is not the norm for you, your awareness is increased, prayerfully in a positive way. There's no need to camouflage our emotions anymore with this tough exterior that we know everything. I used to worship knowledge, and I'm still pretty much a fan of getting book knowledge. However, today, for me, I understand that it's more about what I grow into and how I learn from the things that I'm passing through. Real lived experience, right? I say lived experience, I mean lived, not real life experience, real lived experience. I learned from that. Today, my vulnerability is opening up some of this literature that has gained dust and sharing about that and allowing myself to enjoy it, regardless to what other people around me might think about it, not being influenced to disregard it, is a level of vulnerability for me. What is your vulnerability? And figure that out. What is your next opportunity to stretch yourself in becoming vulnerable? Because more than likely, if everything you have done has gotten you to where you are this morning as you're listening to this podcast, if everything you've done thus far has brought you forward to today, for one thing, you've survived it. However, going into tomorrow, you will need to take everything that you have gained thus far and stretch it into tomorrow. And that's the beauty of becoming vulnerable, because now you're saying to yourself, I can learn from my good and my bad experiences and capitalize on them and make them work for me in my favor for the next encounter that I might have in life. My name is MightyStream. I've enjoyed talking to you. I hope that you will have a beautiful day on purpose. I most absolutely intend to talk to you soon.